donors increased from about 68 to 118, and the number of agencies from 200 to 600. So the proliferation of donors, all of them zeroing in on a government department like his, and wanting different rules of engagement, wanting different reporting structures, so that the process became more important than the substance. And those two were about, and at the same time, as the number of agencies was increasing, the size of grants was decreasing, and so on and so on. So there was a trend there that was not sustainable, and the architecture that had been developed in 1947, 1946 with the Bretton Woods institutions and so on was beginning to fray at the edges, or you could even say it was beginning to crumble. So something had to give. So that's what has changed. But what has not changed is the need. If anything, the need, the demand has grown. We still have got 270 million kids out there who are out of school. We've got many more millions who are in school but are not learning. At the same time, the importance, the centrality of education to overall development has never been clearer. Long-term data and evidence is demonstrating that education is is absolutely foundational to development. And one of the most exciting pieces of data that sort of was released less than a year ago, showing that 50% of global reduction in poverty can be directly attributed to education. We've known this as educators, but just having had evidence to back it up. So on one hand, the demand and the imperative of education has never been clearer. On the other hand, the structures to support education development were getting weaker and weaker, and something had to change.
This is going to be part of this panel as we address the matters of funding, changes in funding, and what has not changed. And I agree with what Dr. Kagia said, that all of us are aware that the funding has changed. And education as a service, as like health, many governments across the globe cannot provide the education service without support from partners. It is an expensive venture, as all of us know. And for the kids in Kenya, we have received a lot of support, bilateral support from government, from basic education all the way to the university, including TVET. And in the recent years, and particularly in the last 1 year, the resources have gone down from bilateral, and we take a case of USAID, FCDO, the major supporters or donors to government. And this calls for governments, and particularly my government, to relook again and to re-strategize that how can we do much with the little that is available from the government budget and even from the partners. And it is a challenge for us to see how we can run programs and ride on the already existing programs for support of a bigger number of programs that are underfunded within the government budget. Because we have activities that are funded by government, every annual budget, there's some allocation for that funding. But we have some activities that are essential, which do not have the funding that we have earned in the recent years. So the thinking is, how do we ride on government projects that are well funded, and then make sure that these other programs that are underfunded are also moving on and they're getting funded. Looking at the role of us who are in this room, I think it's to look at what are the government priorities in whatever country that we are working in, and interrogate the government priorities and pick a priority area. Not a whole program, but you find that there is a priority area that you can pick and run with it to conclusion. Because again, as I've mentioned, education service is very expensive. And I know partners within and without may not have the resources, the big resources that we may require to run these programs. But there are units of programs that are more of conclusive that partners can pick. What has not changed is, as she has said, is the need for quality education. I'm in the State Department for Basic Education. We have millions of children in our schools in basic education, primary 1, pre-primary 1 to grade 6, almost 7 to 8 million. And we need, as government, to provide quality education to the children, calling for equipping the teacher to be a great teacher, providing the instructional materials. So those ones have not changed, and I don't see them changing in the near future. We have some areas in this country where we have got large numbers of learners in a classroom. And these large numbers of learners in a classroom will not disappear by 2030. I assure you that 2031, we still have these classes with those kind of numbers. The question is that how can we offer quality education to these learners, 67 of them with one teacher? How do we make this teacher a great teacher? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for joining this session. I think it's a very important one. And maybe to respond directly to the question is, a lot has changed, but a lot has still remained the same. Thinking back to the last couple of years, as we talk about declining budget numbers, particularly in the education sector, this is something that's not new. Having been in USAID, even when the policy change decision was made, I have seen the journey that we have walked with governments, starting to recognize that the aid basket is shrinking, changing our business model, and focusing more on localization efforts, where we encourage ourselves to partner closely with government, support government priorities, and even when we are not directly putting resources through the national coffers, whatever we do is aligned to government priorities in terms of what they have identified in the national education sector plans, and directly supporting those needs that are identified by government. But also in the process of implementation, focusing on the issues of domestic resource mobilization, and how then do we support government to better allocate the resources that they have, so that then it is able to achieve much more with a heavy focus on cost effectiveness. So when we look at what has happened in the education sector for a long time, we have the recurrent expenses that government must pay. We must have teachers in schools, and there are those overheads for running schools, and there is no walking away from that. But then there are other resources that we can support government to better allocate and achieve much more. And so that is what is changing in terms of how do we generate evidence for government to be able to make decisions that are cost effective, so that they can better allocate their own resources and work with their development partners to allocate resources in a way that achieve the objectives for the country. What has not changed is really the need for quality education, need for access to education, and of course also how then are learners really benefiting from the system? So are we achieving the learning outcomes that are intended and that are set out for our countries? How are we supporting our governments, our teachers, the entire system to be able to then address those needs of the learners in a way that really moves them from where they currently are? I think the data on early grade reading is quite saddening, that we still have only 3 out of 10 learners being able to read and write effectively, and reading is really a foundational skill. So really having those conversations about where do we invest, How do we catalyze the system so that government can make better decisions about their investments? And how do we look at the issue of cost effectiveness so that whatever approaches are taken are sustainable?
Well, thanks a lot for convening this panel, and all of these things have stayed the same. What changed? Certainly we are as other speakers have mentioned, we're in a double financial crisis. It's not only the ODA shock, but a number of countries, even amongst the countries that had well-functioning economy, like Kenya, Senegal, are facing serious domestic financing issues. So we're in a world where you need to do more with less. And I think a good news here is actually coming from a recent What Works Hub analysis, which is that showing that for foundational learning specifically, you don't need so much more spending to improve. Actually, with just $4.8 per student, you can really improve already. Relatively, there's also no development model any longer that does not go through governments. So if we had any doubt that the bilateral model was an alternative, this doubt is gone. So I think this crisis also reinforces the need to work through government. Another thing that's changed on the brighter side is that we now have more and more good news at a completely different scale that change is possible. If you look at the India ASER results of 2024, several states improved, amongst which UP, Uttar Pradesh, which has a population larger than Nigeria, and they increased by 15 percentage points. So it's a new scale also of progress that we're seeing. So that's in India, but in Africa we're also seeing, more and more governments committing to foundational learning. With the Mauritania Declaration last year, as well as the CESA 2026-2035. So I think we're also at a time when there is more demand than maybe ever before from governments for progress. Two other quick things that change, I think, is that we now have more and more talented implementers on the continents, many of whom are in this room, who have the know-how on how to improve at scale and are able to support governments for capabilities they're not able to internalize. And finally, I could not prevent myself from just speaking about AI. That's a huge thing that has changed this year. And AI is not a theoretical thing. If you look at India, organizations like Wadhwani are working at scale in several states and concretely changing the way we do education. So that's another big opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you all. Given this need to do more with less and this focus on domestic governments as the pathway to scale, both as doers and as funders of interventions, what do you wish more innovators knew about how governments make decisions on whether to fund an education solution? And I will turn here for this question to Ruth, Martin, and Lilian.
Hindsight is always 20/20 vision, and there are many things that all of us wish we knew when we started. Perhaps one of the most important ones is that you need to knock at an open door when you get into this innovation space. You need to be very clear about what problem is the innovation supporting. And if I may sort of open a little window here and kind of push back a little bit, more and more in the last 2 decades or so, a very worrying trend had begun to develop where a lot of the innovations on the ground were not driven by specific felt needs by the countries, but by what donors were prioritizing. So if you hear that Gates Foundation is prioritizing foundational learning, you drop whatever it is you are doing on technical vocational education and establish a new program on that. That is not sustainable. The most sustainable programs are those such as the one Clio has mentioned in India, where you realize kids are not learning, but you need to know what is the seriousness of the problem. How do you record and maintain a database that demonstrates progress or lack of it, why it's happening. So, but you are responding to a very specific need. So that's the first one. What problem are you trying to resolve with your innovation, and how well aligned is it to the country need? The second one is, who is going to champion the cause? Once you have developed the proof of concept, who is going to take it forward for you? And again, when you look at the most sustainable innovations, there are those which had an uptake within government. Sometimes it is a minister of education. Sometimes it's just an effective technocrat who is credible within the system, who is able to escalate it up to the top. Sometimes it is the head of state themselves. Zambia, for example, is a good example right now, where the president himself has put his credibility on education and therefore created an enabling environment. The same thing with Sierra Leone. In others, like Ethiopia, is a very effective minister of education who has stood up and said, education is too important for Ethiopia to be left to outsiders, and with or without ODA, we are going to do it. But you need to identify that champion very early on and work with them and feed them and strengthen them to make the case for you. And the third and final one for this round is you need to know you are in it for the long haul. It is not a 2-year event. I cannot think of a single sustainable intervention or innovation that has taken less than 10 years. ASA, which is being quoted quite a lot recently, was at least 15 years of slogging, building coalitions, pushing the evidence in front of people until it is no longer impossible. It became impossible to ignore. So you are in it for the long haul.
To the innovator, who are you innovating for? At the back of the mind as an innovator, that should be at the back of your mind. That you're innovating to support government to solve a problem. So in the case that you innovate for the sake, then it becomes very difficult for the government to take up your innovation. That's one. Two, as you think about the innovation needs to be informed. And I just want to emphasize that governments have their priority areas. Government have got their issues, either systemic or generic over the years. So that when you are proposing an innovation to government, then it's an innovation that the government is ready to take, so that the innovation is able to assist government to alleviate that challenge efficiently and effectively. But an issue arises when an innovator has an innovation for government, in education for our case, and this innovation comes in, and I mentioned it somewhere else, like a capsule, like a dose to government. That this dose, 5 ml or 10 ml, the innovator does a prescription to government that it can only be 5 ml. And if the government does not take 5 ml, then we have a challenge, a conflict between the innovator and government. So there needs to be a lot of negotiation, a lot of engagement with government, because you as a partner, you as an innovator, you want to support government. So you don't want to spend the resources, man hours out there generating evidence, and then the evidence is just thrown, it's rubbished. So it is important to work with government, so that as you come up with this innovation and talk about 5 ml dose or 1 single capsule per day or per week, then government is part of what you are discussing. And that is what we have earned a bit of a challenge. Allow me to extend this briefly, that we have innovations, very good innovations. Working in Malawi, for example, working in Senegal, working in another country. And then an innovator comes to me and says, you know, it is working in Malawi. It is working in Ethiopia. But if you look at the dynamics within Kenya and within Ethiopia, the dynamics are different. So the dose that you give to Ethiopia, you want to transfer it and give the same dose to Kenya, which will not work. So what I want to just submit is that we need a lot of negotiations with governments. We need a lot of talk with government. And I know you've worked with government in terms of your programs. That some times that it becomes very difficult. And I've heard us say, it is a long journey. It's a long negotiations. It's a long talk so that all of us are able to move together with the innovation which can support our countries and our children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think I will take a slightly different approach and maybe share an example of what we've managed to do. So working in innovation is very interesting. You always identify a problem and you're really trying to make a change and make a difference. As EIDU, we started working with an EdTech solution supporting foundational learning in the early childhood centers in Mombasa, in the low-cost private schools. And being able to show the evidence of what that innovation was doing in terms of supporting the learner outcomes, the public school system came knocking, and they wanted the same for the children who go to the public schools. And what did we do? We sat down with the county government of Mombasa, the education offices, and started co-creating the program for the public schools, so that you're taking that which you have tested, it is working and yielding results, but the context in the public schools is slightly different than in the low-cost private schools. And therefore, the need for co-creation in order to make it something that the government can own and can run with, that is aligned to their own policies and their own priorities. The key focus, of course, is if government is also going to invest their domestic resources in this innovation, it needs to be something affordable. So we really focus on the issue of cost effectiveness. So how do you take this model, expand it to the public schools, where there are far more learners than in the low-cost private schools in terms of pupils per class, teacher-pupil ratio, and so on, and make the innovation in such a way that it is adapted to that context in the public school setting. We have seen yield in terms of results that are quite similar to what we saw in the low-cost private schools. But the key is work with government, co-create with government, co-implement with government. So we do not have EIDU officers supporting the program in the schools. It is the education officials at the county who are supporting the programs in the schools. So we are providing the funding in terms of the technology, in terms of the platform, in terms of the dashboard, but the government is providing the teachers, it's providing the education officers, we are providing the training, but we are training together. So using the cascade model, but also being able to expand that so that then it really reaches each and every teacher within the county. So innovations are good and important, but they need to respond to a problem. They need to be context specific. They need to be cost effective so that ultimately they can be scaled up by the government, who really has the mandate to take things to scale.
Thank you so much. Turning over now to the role of philanthropies, bilaterals, multilaterals. I was wondering, what is the role of philanthropy in this new landscape, and what is the role of multilaterals? And I will start with Clio and then hand over to Ruth.
Thank you. So for the previous question, Martin and Ruth spoke about the need to be government-led. And I think we, as well as 4 other philanthropies, are trying not to just talk the talk, but to walk the walk. So in partnership with ADEA and Human Capital Africa, later this month, we're going to be announcing a new initiative called FLIGHT, Foundational Learning Initiative for Government-Led Transformation. And essentially the vision is to improve learning outcomes for children across Africa by accelerating foundational learning reform. And the mission is to link countries leading on foundational learning reforms, like the president of Zambia, that Ruth mentioned earlier, with African-led support and catalytic financing to enable large-scale impact. So the core value are government-led, classroom-focused, and leveraging African expertise. The idea is to build, as mentioned earlier, on some of the things that have worked in the past. Again, structured pedagogy, remediation. You don't need to reinvent, how children learn to read. But the idea is also to break from the old development models in a few key areas. The first one is that, to have different outcomes, you need a different process. And so Flight has benefited from an in-depth consultation over the last year with more than 20 ministers, as well as, technical consultations with people who've spent their career working on the continent to improve foundational learning. And some of its principles are that to focus all the efforts on countries that have political will to improve, to support results on government plans, to leverage, as I was mentioning, national and regional expertise, to be catalytic, so not to be one more project to add to the pile, not to be the 80th donor in Malawi. And the support is going to be focused on a few key areas, including delivery and adaptation to AI. So we're looking forward to hearing your ideas as it gets announced later this month, but this is at least for us one of the way we can experiment on doing development differently in the coming years to respond to the challenges mentioned. Thanks.
Thank you.
I was very excited about at the end of September when the Eden Prize Foundation announced that Mohamed of Ared in Senegal had won the Eden Prize. I was excited about it for a whole lot of reasons. Selfishly, because I sit on the advisory committee of Eden Prize Foundation, but it had nothing to do with this. The only thing perhaps we may have contributed is we kept saying to Eden, all the prizes, and we are on the 9th year, that Eden Foundation has given have all been from other continents, not a single one from Africa. Tangentially, CAMFED, but at that time it was not even being, so it was being led from outside. And we kept saying there's a lot of innovative energy in the continent, but we need to spotlight it. We need to hear about it. And having Mohamed win that prize for me was a very proud moment for Africa, because you begin to see there are many more Mohameds that are doing work. All of you sitting here have that potential to provide breakthroughs. And we need also to recognize Gates Foundation that had identified this foundation among 11 others that were doing really creative work in the continent. And we've been working with them for about 2 years to see how do you strengthen the institutional framework for these incubators that are doing such good work. So, in a sense, that answers the question in one form. A critical role of philanthropy and foundations and the private sector is to spotlight what is working, give it sort of a platform to engage and influence. Another role goes back to the response to our first question, which was what has changed. And as everybody said, there is no shortcut to quality education. You must have teachers, you must have learning materials, you must have safe learning environments, all the things we've known from day one. What is different is we need to do it cost effectively. There's urgency and there's also a constraint. So where you come in as a body of incubators is to focus much more sharply on how can you get a bigger bang out of every dollar or shilling invested in education. So cost effectiveness. Two, given that the concern was that results are taking a long time and they were suboptimal, one of the statistics that really makes me uncomfortable is this 90% of kids under age 10 cannot read and write. And I keep saying, so have we all been wasting our lives if only 10% have learned? So we need to turn that on its head and show not the 90% who can read, but of the 10% who can, what is it that they are doing right that can be expanded? So we need to be much more aggressive, much more proactive about showing results, not for 5,000 kids, but for 5 million, which then speaks to the issue of scale up. And that, again, takes us to the need for data. You cannot know where you're going unless you know where you are coming from. You cannot know how far you've gone unless you know where you started. So providing data, spotlighting what is working, and being much more single-minded about showcasing what is working and how it is working and in what circumstances is it working.
My final question to you is maybe the hardest, but if you could, in a word, tell us what is the key ingredient to successfully scaling in this new landscape?
Leadership. It's all about leadership. It doesn't have to come from the top. It can come from any level in the system, but you can only lead a country from the center. As somebody said, no civilization has ever civilized another civilization.
Co-creation, collaboration, and partnership. And a partnership whereby we have got all the cans on the table. There are no cans under the table. You get what I mean? Yeah, thank you very much.
One word, accountability. Yeah.
I would say working with governments. And if I can add a second word, I think we should all think about how to leverage the potential of AI also for scale in the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We have time for some questions from the audience. So if you have a burning question, please raise your hand and I'll come over so that you can ask it.
Thank you very much, our panelists. My name is Collins Munene. I work with Room to Read. My question, I raise for two things. One, a question and a call for action. I know, and thank you, Dr. Kagia and Martin, and I'm raising this question, having worked with Dr. Kagia in the previous administration in leading a presidential initiative on STEM. And Dr. Kagia was on the back end to the success of it. But also on the other foot now in the NGO for many years. And my question is to both Martin, who you're already in the system, in the government. Has there been a realization that there has been a shift in funding? And I'm asking this because in the landscape where we are, it seems like it's business as usual as far as the government support or the partner support is concerned. So that's the question, and maybe it may be a little bit of a higher pay scale grade to be able to answer that, but it's a reality that we really need to wake up to the realization that the dependency on funding from our funders and the partners in the space has shifted. And I'm saying this because as partners in the education fraternity, foundational learning and health and everybody else, we all have very specific agendas based on our own mission and mandate, but the bigger goal is general well-being for our children, for our youth, advancement in literacy and all these things. But we only can plug in where there is a genuine realization on the other side that the plug-in is also going to scale. So that's a question. But also for us on the other side, on the other foot with with the partners, I think there needs to be some realization that, and I think there is some realization that we are all playing in the same playground. We all need to play in the bigger stadium. But in some reality, we're playing in our own backyards. And very good at playing in our own backyards. So the realization and successful things like what Clio is saying, and she's quite familiar with Room to Read in South Africa, where as much as there is this float funding we are talking about, it's a coalition of donors that have come together and said, we want to scale the work with the government. So let's have a work plan as a coalition of funders, as a coalition of NGOs and partners aligning to the government's agenda. So too many words, but I would like to hear a little bit from Martin and Dr. Kagia, how we can make this a reality and a long-term reality. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Morty Ballin. I work with Crystal House International, and we run schools in South Africa, India, Jamaica, Mexico, and the United States. And I think my question is, I share the ambition of scale, and as you're saying, 5 million students, we should be thinking about that. And I think the school is where the action is. The unit of change is at the school. Those teachers, that school leader, the students who go to school every day are signing up to go to a school. They're not signing up to go to a scale. And I'm curious, what practices have you seen with scaling initiatives that sort of centers the unique context of the individual school to get to the big scale that we're trying to get to, and the role that the school plays in these efforts? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Foster. I work with Sabre Education from Ghana. I think my question is on the very last question our panelists responded to. In your views, what do you think are some of the systems that the government can put in place to ensure coordination and partnership for innovators? Because what you realize is that in most of the African countries, you go to a particular county or region, and there are several innovators operating within that small space. Then there are other counties or regions with no innovations at all. And for most of the leaders, all that they need is for the innovator to say, I've been trying this, it is working, there is some evidence. But there are no coordination efforts to say, look, in this county or in this region, we have these organizations that are already working within this field. So either you partner and work with them, or you work in these other counties or regions that are not working. Because if we don't do that, then always our evidence regarding learning outcomes will be coming down, because there are other unreached areas that nobody wants to go. And so what systems can we really put in place as government to coordinate efforts of innovators to ensure that we are not duplicating efforts, wasting resources, and we are achieving the best? Thank you.
So 2 questions. Really, one around how can organizations play in the bigger stadium, and how can practices at the school level be scalable? And the second one around systems that governments can put in place to ensure partnership. And I might actually hand it over to all of the panelists to answer them.
A month ago, I published a short piece on DevEx, where the title was Reclaiming the Promise of Education in this environment, and I touched on most of the issues that we are discussing here. The underlying message is, let's not waste a good crisis. In response to Monene's question, let's not waste a good crisis. How do we harness the ongoing resetting of the development landscape to do better what we do? And philanthropy and private sector in some ways is beginning to pave the way for that. But specifically to your question about whether governments are aware of how fundamental the shift is, this is not something that happens sort of instantly to everybody, it gradually sinks in. But where you come in as a group of researchers and innovators is seizing windows of opportunity, making sure that you align what you're doing to where the shoe is pinching most. If I take an example of Kenya right now, which is going through a major curriculum reform, one of the areas where I expect the shoe to pinch is making sure that the assessment process, where you are moving from, to continuous assessment, is robust and sustainable. Any innovation and intervention that helps to make assessments more robust is going to be at a higher premium in Kenya today than it would have been a year ago. So understanding where a country's needs are in education and aligning the innovation a bit more closely to that. Because in responding to a government at its point of greatest need, you are in a sense almost helping them deal with the resetting that is happening. Secondly, just a matter of course, effectiveness. There are some very, very good innovations already, and not, many of them you are behind. But if it's going to cost 10 times more per student than the other interventions are, the treasury is going to basically say, what happens after the donor funding has gone? So cost effectiveness must become a centerpiece of the engagement. And I think when we are innovating in a small scale, I was talking before we started to those people who visited Toto, and I was asking, how scalable do you think this is? As long as it can be scaled without additional costs, as long as you can pull in many more people, you create a self-sustaining organic program that becomes self-sustaining, you address many of the issues that are emerging from donor, the decline in donor funding.
Have government realized the challenge that is coming with reduced funding? Yes and no. And I'll look at it as from this perspective. In Kenya currently, there's a lot of engagements with partners, just like this congregation this morning, which was not the case a few years ago, because what the government has realized in my case is that the resources are not available for the programs that it used to be the last, let's say, even 3-4 years ago. And you'll notice that to a larger extent, you'll find the government and the Ministry of Education in that matter being actively involved in such meetings. It is an indication that, yes, we want to hear what partners are saying. We want to engage with the partners because we realize that there's a potential within the partners that we can work together to address some of these challenges. And in the last maybe 1 year, 2 years, I've actually attended quite a number of such a panel, such meetings, so that we engage. And I would like to put it to the partners, Alina, that extend the invitations to governments where you're working. Just tell government we have got this. As they reached out to us, come over and hear what we are talking about. And give the government a platform to say, this is what we are thinking as government. This is where we have the gaps as government, so that you are able to move together. But it has dawned to the government, quite a number. I attended UK Field last month, and still there was that discussion that the government are finding it a bit difficult to meet the general operations, besides interventions, programs across Africa and across the world. So extend these invitations to government where you have such a forum here in Kenya or across, so that you are able even to get to know and impress on government on what is happening. Foster has mentioned about duplications of innovators in favorable counties or regions or provinces. Yes, it is true. And the government has a big role to regulate, not to regulate, but to know what the innovators are doing. So that if you want to move to the Kenyan coast, in our case, the government is aware that we have got this organization which is moving to the Kenyan coast, but we have got another organization which is doing a similar intervention in the Kenyan coast, so that we don't have these duplications. But you find some of the innovators, is it bypassing? Yeah, they don't inform government of what they are doing. So you find 5, 6 of them in a certain county doing almost the same thing, targeting the same learners, targeting the same teacher. We have teachers who are being capacity built this week, 2 of them from a school, and then after 2 weeks, another 2 teachers being capacity built on the same thing by another partner or another organization. So what I would like to mention is that let us inform, let us know, or let us ministries or governments know this is what you're doing, so that we avoid this duplication. And finally, for partners, I think that it is good also to engage within yourselves. Playing in the field, not at the backyard, as Collins mentioned. Playing in the field so that all of us, we form a team. When you engage government, you're engaging government as a team from a team perspective than when we do it individually. Individually, yes, but there's that, what are the education partners in Kenya saying? What is their voice at this particular point on this particular issue? Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to echo that, the need for more collaboration and partnerships amongst ourselves as partners to the government, but also then taking the cue from government and really working closely with them. Co-creation sometimes seems like a buzzword because we already come with our positions and our innovations, and we want government to adopt them wholesale, but we really need to give a room for real collaboration and real co-creation so that it is ours and theirs, and together it's for the learners we are trying to impact. Otherwise, we will continue in this cycle where all of us are doing something towards one goal, but because we are doing similar things and different things, we are ultimately not reaching the desired goal. So the need to really be deliberate and accountable to each other in terms of what innovation am I bringing to the table, what do you have, what resources do I need to put to this, what resources do you need to put to that, so that together we can make an impact. I want to talk a little bit about the schools and the question on the school. And I think that is where the greatest difference is going to be made. Policies, guidance are very important, but children learn in a classroom or under a tree or under something, depending on sometimes the infrastructure challenges that they're learning under. But the important thing is that learning is being facilitated by somebody. And for that somebody to facilitate that learning, they need certain tools, and they need to be able to have a way in which they're delivering their curriculum. And so we first of all need the curriculum that maybe in some countries is a national curriculum, some places it's a state curriculum, but either way there needs to be a curriculum that a teacher is implementing. They also need the teaching and learning resources to implement that curriculum. So teaching and learning material are important. So we mainly focus on books, but it's not just about books. It's about all other resources, and sometimes it's not the most expensive, glossy, imported resources that make a difference. It is the local resources. It is the stones the children have picked that they're able to use for number work, within their environment, because they don't have the manipulatives that are imported from wherever, but they have the local resources. It is the little cardboards that the teacher cuts with the children during the art class that they then use for the reading lessons. So it is also adapting learning to the context and the resources that are available locally, so that then it also reduces the cost. Remember, we are focusing on cost effectiveness. And moving from there, it's how are we preparing our teachers to be able to then deliver this curriculum. So it is the issue of teacher capacity building, teacher training. We are lucky in some countries like Kenya, we have a huge resource of trained teachers. It's not the case in everywhere. I think even in Kenya, in some of our areas, in our refugee camps, there's the challenge of trained qualified teachers. And across the continent, that is a gap that exists. So then what kind of skilling can we do for those who are trying within a limited environment to make a difference in terms of teaching? So what sort of support systems do we develop for them? And this is where the level at the field, here we call them field officers, becomes important. The quality assurance and standards officers, the curriculum support officers, the instructional coaches who go out to the schools, visit with the teachers, sit in the classrooms, observe the lessons, are able to provide feedback to the teachers, to coach them on aspects that they're struggling with. The ability to have a teacher reflection forum within cluster meetings so that teachers have peer support. I am a teacher, I am teaching in the northern part of Kenya. By the time an education officer reaches to me, the school term is over. But within there is my colleague teachers in my school or in my neighboring school who can help me with an aspect that I'm struggling with. So that is something we need to push for a lot more. Within our professions, we have community of practice. We're not pushing enough for the teachers to develop communities of practice within their locality. And that is something that may be more effective than the once-in-a-while national teacher training, which can be quite expensive and may not be sustained by government. But because teachers are in a school, there's a neighboring school and another one, they can come together under the tree and discuss what are the challenges they're facing in their classrooms. How do I address this? I have noticed that some of my learners are not following. What do I do? What other ways can I approach this? And there's a lot of power in that kind of interaction and collaboration. At the school level, we also have the heads of institutions. Here we call them head teachers, some places they're called principals and so on. How are we bringing them into that level of management beyond looking at the budgets and resources, but actually at the classroom level where a difference is being made? Children are in the class, teachers are in the class, but if the head teacher and the principal is only sitting in their offices and they never go to the classroom to know what it is that is happening in the classroom, what are the challenges, how then do they even decide how to allocate resources for teaching and learning materials? They don't know what's happening. So we need to move them out of their offices into the classroom to be able to understand what is happening in the classroom, what are the challenges and the support that the teachers need, so that then they can provide that kind of a support, so that then we can start to see the needle move for each and every learner within the classroom, ultimately in the school, and then in the zone, and largely in the county, and ultimately in the country. So change can happen. It is slow, but it can be effective. It can be small wins quickly if we focus at the learner level and at the teacher level within the school setup. Otherwise, if we just sit here and design policies, which are very important because they guide the whole system, but we never let those policies filter to the classroom, then we have this huge gap and disconnect between what we have on documents and what is the reality in the classroom. And yet the classroom is the level at which the difference will be made. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't repeat what has been said. I'll just add a small note on this point around the fact that real change happened at the school level and at the classroom level that I really empathize with. Because indeed, as Lilian said very well, the only thing that matters is that teachers change their practice day in and day out. I think the kind of two small additions I would say is that I think it's important to, when we think about changes in teaching practices, in particular for foundational literacy and numeracy, is that we all understand that this is really not about rocket science, and it's not about teachers needing to reinvent the wheel. It's like targeted support so that teachers can really better use the materials and use the materials more reliably. And so I think the systems Lilian described are a very, is the type of scaffolding that is needed. And maybe the last point is that bringing this conversation on change at the school level with the previous conversation on, change needing to be government-led. I think a big gap today is that we do have quite a bit of research on what effective teaching looks like. We have a decent amount of research on what good coaching looks like, but we have very little research and evidence on how to support, the level above, districts, sub-districts, the bosses of the coaches, to actually provide that support so that, things trickle down the chain and things happen in a bit more of an endogenous way in this change level at the school and classroom level. So I think that's a really interesting research agenda on, how can the non-state sector actually help, that level of the district, sub-district level, the bosses of the coaches, to actually make sure that things happen instructionally at the level under. Thanks.
The Ministry of Education of the Government of Kenya is participating on the Spotlight series, the GM report, Global Education Monitoring Report 2024-2025. The theme is the role of school and system leaders on foundational learning. We have done this report with UNESCO and the Spotlight series office. We intend to launch the report during the ADEA Triennale towards the end of the month. But before that, we would like to present the report to the partners, possibly next week. We agree on the date, and when you find the invitation, come in and see what we have been able to generate as a country report on school and system leaders, their role on foundational learning. So I extend the invitation, and we'll be able to share the link so that you're able to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a really exciting invitation. We'll make sure we circulate it widely. Round of applause for our amazing panelists.